Going? Yeah. All right. Okay, so we'll start off with this song here. This is a more recent song that has not been recorded in the studio yet. We pulled up in a crummy part of town, slums and gangsters all around. There was only ghost town glamour to be found. We tuned up like automatons, a robot moves moving on and on, feeling blank and empty through the steel grey dawn, through the night drained of light, nearly halfway gone. We were like criminals on the run from something that we'd never done, singing songs of damaged dreams and love and whatever we could think of. Headed down to the crummy part of town. Barroom shadows of hustlers, drunken thugs and kung fu bouncers, droning narcotic conversations, rising louder and louder, singing songs of a world we thought we knew, but we didn't know nothing. Now I know it's true. That's the paradox of dealing in the art of feeling blue. We were like criminals on the run from something that we'd never done, singing songs of damaged dreams and love and whatever we could think of. We got on down to the crummy part of town. We were just criminals on the run from something that we'd never done, singing songs of damaged dreams and love and whatever we could think of. I can see it now, the crummy part of town. Come on, we gotta get down to the crummy part of town. Come on, we gotta get down to the crummy part of town.
Welcome to the MMHP in the 989, channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history. Recorded live inside the Rock Legends Hall of Fame in Bay City, Michigan. Featuring Dr. J, Sir Fred, Mr. Mike, and your host, Scott Baker.
Here we are on the road in Detroit at the Trinosophes coffee shop with our special guest, Matthew Smith. Matthew, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Oh, we're excited to have you on the show, that's for sure. You are in two outstanding music groups, the Volebeats and Outrageous Cherry. How do you get to be in two great musical groups like that?
Well, it's a long answer to that question, but I mean, basically, you know, I just like started playing in bands before I was even in high school, you know, back in the late 70s, and played in a lot of bands through the 80s that were always struggling to sort of, you know, kind of find our identity and do something worthwhile. And it was always a struggle, you know, and I just, you know, everything was always falling short and everything was always leading to, you know, disappointment and, you know, just everything was just a you know, nonstop string of failures artistically and mostly artistically. But, you know, that was the 80s. And then at some point in the late 80s, I started playing with people where we started getting results, you know, like the music started sounding better. And the Volebeats really were the first group that I played with where it occurred to me that, wow, what we're doing here actually sounds like it sounds as good as the records I listen to, you know? And so that was kind of how it came about. The Volebeats were just a group of songwriters playing in the basement in the late 80s. And, you know, we just, you know, was put together by Jeff Oakes, the other guy that I've been doing it with. He kind of started it and pulled us all together in the basement. And the original songwriters were these guys, Terry Rome and Al Oakes. And they were writing the songs. At that time, I was playing upright bass. But anyway, we ended up going out and we were all just playing on acoustic guitars. We sounded like a skiffle band at the time. And so we started going out and playing on street corners in Royal Oak and stuff, and going around playing these weird gigs where we played a gig in Noir leather, you know, in front of all this bondage gear, and then we'd play out in the middle, play out in front of the train tracks outside, and played in front of a John Waters movie at one point. You know, we just did these weird gigs, and you know, then the two guys that were the songwriters, ended up having to leave the band. The psychological landscape of the band became complicated, and they had to be. You know, they kind of drifted away, and we had a half an album finished with those guys, and so Jeff and I had to finish the album. So we thought, well, you know, we should write a couple songs, you know, to finish this album, you know, and then that kind of got us writing. You know?
I was going to ask you, had you been writing songs before that?
Not real good ones, but I had, but I not, you know, but the thing with the Volebeats was suddenly we had a band where the writing was at a higher level, and I would say it was because of Terry Rome and Al Oakes, but Jeff and I kind of had to follow them, you know, to finish this album, and you know, the gig where those guys both were out of the band, where the, you know, I mean, I don't know if I should get into all the details, but you know, like, you know, certain people were dragged off by the cops, and there was all kinds of stuff happened. And so we ended up at a gig without either of our songwriters. And Jeff and I are like, how are we going to get through this, man? You know, the talent's not here. It's just us guys, you know? So we went on stage and got through whatever songs we could get through without the two talented guys. And the audience accepted us. And we were just kind of shocked, you know, like, wow, you know, like maybe, you know, so that led us to continue, just the fact that, well, you know, and then we had to write the songs for the album. So one thing led to another, and then the Volebeats just kept going and kept recording, and eventually, you know, it gradually became about there were different writers in the band, but it came really about Jeff and I harmonizing and our vocals as the band having two vocalists. So that was the thing. And then, but I was writing other songs that didn't fit with the Volebeats. In the early 90s, and that was how Outrageous Cherry happened. It was like I had these other songs, and initially I wanted to do a project where there'd be a female singer doing these songs, and I was encouraged by a friend of mine. She said, you know, write some songs for me to sing, you know, and basically she wanted, like, you know, songs that sounded like Leslie Gore, but with, like, you know, Petula Clark type stuff, but with you know, kind of disturbing Lou Reed type content.
All right.
And I thought, I think I can try that, you know. And so I kind of started writing. You know, I was writing these songs already, you know, but I just started writing stuff, and then what ended up happening was, you know, the whole thing didn't work out, and I ended up with these songs. So I ended up kind of becoming the Petula Clark figure in this band that I originally intended to be, like, behind the scenes, you know. And so then I was sort of shoved out front. But I found a bassist, drummer, and guitarist that I thought would be interesting to play with, that played differently than a lot of the other people at that time in the early 90s. And so all of a sudden, I've got this other band, you know, so that's how it happened. It was,
yeah, and I'm so impressed by your ability to kind of invoke the 1960s in your songs without sounding like you're trying to be a 1960s artist. And yet, you know, the sound of Outrageous Cherry, it also impressed me as it's almost timeless, you know. It sounds like it could have been recorded in 1966, but it also sounds like it could have been recorded in the 1980s, like college rock radio.
Yeah.
You just have a knack of, capturing that particular style. Did you grow up listening to 60s music? Was that a big root cause?
That's basically what it is. I mean, I think what happened was when Outrageous Cherry started, there were bands our contemporaries at that time were bands like My Bloody Valentine and Yola Tango, and there were other things going on. But when we started playing, I think what happened was just suddenly all the music of my childhood kind of came roaring back into my head, which was growing up on things like the Turtles and Francois Hardy. And the Petula Clark thing, I listened to those records. I listened to all the AM stuff from the 60s.
Right. Yeah.
But the Turtles were a real big one for me. That was their harmonies and things like that. And, and then, just, so those were the kind of things that were, and the Trogs, I was sort of Monkeys. We were thinking about those things. But we never discussed what we were doing. I would just show up with a song and play it, and the band would just start playing. And we never had discussions about, let's do this or that. It was just the individuals contributed what they did. And the main thing for me was just making sure that the drummer didn't have cymbals, because at that time the cymbals were really bothering my ears. And it was like, having played in bands with people wailing on the cymbals, it was just destroying my hearing. And when I'd sing, it'd distract me. So I tried doing, having the drum set down to just a tom and a snare, because I figured that's all I can hear on my old Stones albums anyway. I just hear the boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say that I would never have thought of that idea if it hadn't been for seeing the Gories, because I saw the Gories and she had a real minimal kit, Peg, and I don't even think she had a snare drum. She had like a bass drum with no head on it, 2 giant toms. I don't know what it was, but it sounded like Bo Diddley when she played it. And our thing wasn't, we didn't. We didn't have the Bo Diddley beat that the Gories had,
Right.
But seeing her play without cymbals, I think that put that in my head.
What inspired you? There's a lot of kind of like psychedelia drifting through a lot of your songs too.
Yeah.
Was there? I know the Turtles indulged a little bit into that.
Yeah.
But that was a big part of AM radio in the late '60s. A lot of the bands, even we might call them pop bands, would incorporate a little psychedelia in there.
Oh yeah.
So that's
I'll tell you,
like a main inspiration for you too.
Well, totally. We were really getting into all the like my guitar player Larry Ray was a really big record collector, and he had bought all these records back when he was a kid. He was a guy who remembered buying a Buddy Holly record when Buddy Holly was still around. So he was 10 years older than me.
Okay.
So he was his first.
He's from my era.
Well, his first concert was Jimi Hendrix at Cobo Hall. So, but what was interesting is that Outrageous Cherry. That was the other thing, is we were a multi-generational band where everyone in the band tended to be, through the history, just about everyone in that group was like 10 years apart from everybody else. So at the end of the band, I think we literally were 4 people that were 10 years apart. Between the 4 of us. Our drummer was probably 20. There was like 23. We were all like 10 years apart from each other. So we weren't like a band that, a bunch of kids who know each other from the neighborhood or from high school deciding to, play together because of a social thing. It was like we were there because we had a common interest in musical things, and that spanned the generational thing. But Larry had the records, so he would sometimes show up at practice and, he would just, sometimes he'd borrow money from me, and then he'd show up and he'd be like, hey man, I don't have that $5 for you, but will you take this? And he'd hand me a stack of 45s. I'm like, yeah, it's fine, Larry, And then I'd just set the 45s aside, and then I'd come back to it a year later. I'd be going through this, and if one of the 45s I found in the stack was, it's a long story, but that record Politicians in My Eyes by the band Death. And it was in that stack, and I'm like, oh, this is a pretty cool Blue Oyster Cult influenced record that's probably from Roseville. And then way later, the story came out, and actually I'm interviewed in that movie, a band called Death, because I was sort of kind of there when we kind of were in a record store and figured out the history of that band. But that's the kind of stuff Larry would lay on me. He laid a 45 on me called Red Sky at Night by The Accent, on the Parrot label. Wow. And it's just like the most
unbelievable out there psychedelic single you could possibly imagine, you know, and I never heard of it, never, you know, and then when we went and played in England, we walked into the club we were playing, and the DJ who had all these records was playing that record.
No way.
Yeah, wow. So, you know, but, you know, we were listening to all that stuff, but, you know, one of the things, I was actually talking to someone about this the other day, that was a real key influence on the guitar, the dual guitar thing. I mean, we were aware of bands like Television and stuff that had like dual guitars, and, you know, and Television was an influence for sure, you know, but the thing that really influenced the guitar stuff was this guitar player from Detroit, Ted Lucas. And are you guys familiar with him?
Spike Drivers.
Spike Drivers. And what it was, and was that before we started the band, me and Susanna, who was our original drummer, went to the Ark to see an open mic, and Susanna dragged me because friends of hers were playing at this open mic, and we went into the Ark, and there's all these people playing with their acoustic guitars, and it was just, I just didn't want to be there. It was just really terrible, and it was like either late 80s, early 90s, and it was just like, you know, it was just this dreadful open mic, and I'm just like, man, I want to get out of here, man. All these people are playing this stuff, you know, and so I walked down the parking lot, and then it was boring out there too, so I went back in, and when I went back in, there's this guy on stage, literally the best guitar player I've ever heard in my life, and I'm just spellbound, you know, and he gets off stage, and I immediately accosted him and started harassing him, like, who are you, man, you know, what's the story, what do you know, kind of like, where have you been hiding, you know, and he's like, oh, I'm Ted Lucas, I used to play with the Spike Drivers and the Horny Toads, and used to do sessions for Motown, and, you know, so anyway, he laid it on me, that his whole story, you know, and you know, and then later on, a few weeks later, I found his record, but that was a real, you know, hearing him and seeing him, that influenced me. It was like, it really was had an effect on me, that little moment there. And then shortly after, you know, it started Outrageous Cherry, and one of our early practices, I go to practice, and Larry's like, you know, this guy I used to be in a band with just passed away. I'm like, who was it? He's like, oh, his name was Ted Lucas. I'm like, you played with Ted Lucas? And he's like, yeah, well, I was in the last version of the Spike Drivers. And it turned out that Larry played in the last version of the Spike Drivers, and so he'd been mentored by him as a musician. So there was this real connection between us and the Spike Drivers and Lucas, who at that time nobody had heard of except people who actually saw them in the 60s.
Right.
You know?
I was really impressed by a song called Detroit Blackout, which was an instrumental, very psychedelic. Was that a Larry Ray kind of thing, or is that something you and Larry came up with, or just you?
You know what happened there? That song, like a lot of our instrumentals with the band, there's a lot of instrumentals on the records, and what those are is just I hear a riff in my head, and we'll be in the studio, and I'll just be like, I'll start playing, and I'll look at the band, I go, hey, pick up on this, hit record, and we just hit record and we play it, and we just made it up on the spot, and then after we made it up, I don't know whose idea it was to have Larry sing on it, but I didn't have any, you know, it was just an instrumental, but somebody in the room suggested, hey, let's have Larry do a vocal, and Larry got on the mic and did his thing, you know, and did it in one take.
It's
and that
so
was
strange.
Yeah.
But yet, you know, I remember it very, very much reminded me of a cut on a Yardbirds record. I think it was Little Games maybe, where they did a very psychedelic kind of thing with the sort of like voices in the background.
Oh, glimpses.
There you go. Right.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of that, but it was just very cool though. I just.
Well, what ended up happening after that album came out, we ended up playing Detroit Blackout as our opening song on tour, because it was the only way we could do a sound check, because, you know, the sound check would always, you know, you do your sound check, then the other band would play, you'd come on, all the levels are wrong. Yep. So we'd just start our set with that and just play and kind of get our adjustments right as best we could, you know, with that song. And at one point somebody put a video up on YouTube of us playing it in Nashville to a really almost empty room. It was a really small audience, and we're playing that song, and I was shocked at how good it sounded. And then, but that video's been taken down, and I never managed to grab it.
Oh, I would love to see that.
Yeah, it was real cool. Yeah.
How did you, you know, when I was looking at your list of recordings, and I see that you made a recording on Delphi Records.
Yeah.
Which, I'm old enough that I bought some of the original Richie Valens 45s on Delphi. Donna and La Bamba, That's My Little Susie. And, so I was a big Richie Valens fan.
Yeah.
And that Delphi label had kind of disappeared, and then it was resurrected. Mm-hmm. How did you team up with it? Was Bob Keane still involved in that?
Yeah.
After all these years.
Man, it was strange. What happened was they started up again because what I believe happened was that Quentin Tarantino had licensed a bunch of their surf records for that Pulp Fiction film. Mm-hmm. So Keane just was like, well, I'll start the label up. All of a sudden he had a big pile of money from that. So he hired a bunch of guys in LA, like there were record collectors and stuff. But these guys he hired turned out to be like the best record guys in LA. I mean, these guys all went on to work for Rhino and stuff like that. They went on to do it and all kinds of stuff. But he just happened to hire these guys that were real cool. And there was a journalist in Detroit at the time named Colin McDonald, who was a good friend of mine, and he passed away in the late 90s. But at some point before Colin passed away, he just, I don't know, he just told them about us, or told me, he said, hey, you got to send the record you're working on, which at that time was Out There in the Dark. So you got to send it to these Delphi guys. They'll like it. So I did. And the Delphi guys, the younger guys in the office, they loved it. And they were like, we want to put this out. And they played it for Bob Keane. Bob Keane's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And then Bob Keane changed his mind and was like, I don't want to do that. He was just kind of tight with money. But what ended up happening was my drummer at that time was Deb Agoli, who had also been in the band Viva Cauldron, that was like a heavy psychedelic band from Detroit before Outrageous Cherry, that was also an influence on our psychedelic direction. So when Deb came in, she had a whole psychedelic music history that preceded mine. But Deb called me up one day and she's like, hey, I'm going to LA because our friend Mikey Clark, who produced ICP, the Insane Clown Posse, was flying to LA to master an ICP record, and he had an extra plane ticket, so he was taking Deb just to go hang out in LA. And I'm like, well, look, if you're just going to hang out in LA, well, while you're out there, why don't you drop in at the Delphi office and just go in and, they passed on our record, but why don't you drop in there, their fans, just see what, just go and say hi to them. And she's like, okay. So she showed up at the Delphi office and walked in, and she's like, hi, I'm Deb from Outrageous Cherry. And they were all like, oh, good to meet you. And Bob Keane, I guess, walked out of his office. He's like, who's this? And they're like, oh, that's the girl from that band you passed on. And he's like, oh. And then after she left, he's like, let me listen to that again. And he went and listened to it. He's like, yeah, you can put it out. So Deb went in there and just made a very, very good impression face to face, which is kind of how it is in the music business. It's like if you deal with people on the phone, nothing happens. But if you're dealing with people face to face, then you can get ahead of the guy who's just calling on the phone.
Right.
And so anyway, so Deb walked in there and basically landed us the deal with Delphi. And so they put the record out, and then we went out to LA to play gigs. And when we first got out there, the first thing we did is went to have a meeting in Bob Keane's office. And Bob Keane was just, the same guy that he was in the 50s, basically, a little older, And we went into his office, and I think when we went in, he was on the phone with Chan Romero, who had done the hippie shake.
You bet.
And he was like Chan Romero was like calling up looking for money or something. So he's like on the phone with Chan Romero, and Larry Ray knew those records from when he was a kid. So he's like, oh my God, he's on the phone with Chan Romero. So he gets off the phone and he talks to us, and he was like, so we'll put out this record and we'll hope. He goes, no, I don't use the word hope. We intend that we have some success with it, and that's what we do. And I'm not really into rock and roll. I'm a big band guy. I play the clarinet, but you listen to your stuff and I hear something different. So we'll put this out and see what happens. That was the conversation. So he was really an old school big band dude.
Wow.
And I got to talk to him a little bit about things like Richie Valens and Bobby Fuller. We talked a little bit.
Yeah.
But he was definitely, a big band clarinet player who, like a lot of guys from that era, I mean, him producing Richie Valens was really the result of him kind of being kicked out of the label that he was started to put out the Sam Cooke record, and when he left, you know, he took his tape recorder with him, and I guess his partners tried to come to get the tape recorder back, and he was like an, you know, ex-Korean War vet, so he put a gun in their face to try to take the tape machine, and they didn't.
Old school music business, right there.
Yeah. So they didn't. They felt it was not worth it to retrieve the tape machine, and since he had this tape machine, he's like, I got to do something with this tape machine, so he went and found Richie Valens and like, hey, come on over and record. And that's the genesis of Donna. It was the tracks for Donna were recorded on this machine. So, but it was just a trajectory of, like, I think when he got out of the war, you know, the big band thing was over. He had to do something else. You know, so. Right. But he was a very interesting guy, and it was very surreal to be, you know, anytime you're playing in a band and you're doing something and you're sort of step into another world like that, you know, where all of a sudden we're overlapping with a different era. And that's happened to us with a few different people, where we just kind of connect with the source of not just our inspiration, but, you know, the people who invented rock and roll.
Now, after you released that was your only release on Delphi.
Well, what happened was right after it came out, the guys from Creation Records in England saw us on this trip where we met Bob Keane. They saw us play the following night, and they were like, we want to sign you to Creation. Where can we meet? I said, well, we're going to be at the Delphi office tomorrow. We'll be there, you know. So they came to the Delphi office, and then, you know, one of the Creation guys, Joe, just walks up to me, you know, not even very far from all the other guys, and just walks up to me and is like, now, how do we get you off this label?
Oh, my.
And so, you know, long story short, what happened was Bob Keane had us under contract, but he was cool and let us out of our deal. You know, he basically was like, you know, it was like, I forget what the deal was, but he just was sort of like, I had my lawyer offer, you know, to just give him $1,000 and give us our contract back, you know, and he's like, I don't know, I think I want to make some money off this. And then he thought about it for 5 minutes and called back. He's like, I'll take that $1,000, gave us our contract back. And then we were about to sign with Creation. And then all of a sudden I got a phone call. They said, don't sign the deal because Alan McGee is going to leave Creation. Yeah, he said, and you want to be on his next label, you know, because he's going to start a new label called Pop Tones. So if you sign with Creation now, you're going to be dealing with a different crew of people. So we ended up not signing the Creation deal, and we waited, and then we were one of the first releases on Pop Tones. And that really got our music around the world, you know. And,
okay.
And it was a short-lived label because eventually after 9/11 and all this, you know, I don't know, something went wrong with the financing of the label. At first it was this really, you know, but that was what happened. It was like the Creation thing became Pop Tones. But the little time we were on Pop Tones, the record was released everywhere. It was released in Japan and Brazil. I mean, so that got our music out there, you know.
Wonderful. And then you signed with was it Rainbow Quartz? Is that
was the label? It was a small label out of New York, and what happened was when the Pop Tones kind of collapsed all at once, and you know, one of the guys working with Pop Tones told me, he said, hey man, just you know get another deal, abandon this, get another deal right away. So I kind of jumped. With this label was recommended to me, and I just kind of jumped into it because we had a record that had just come out on Pop Tones, and that was just basically going to disappear. So I got them to do a American release of the Pop Tones record, of the Book of Spectral Projections, which was our psychedelic rock opera, basically. That like when Alan McGee told me, he's like, "What's your next album going to be like?" I said, "Well, actually, it's kind of a rock opera." He's like, don't tell anyone that. Don't tell, especially journalists. Just don't say nothing. But Alan thought we were totally crazy, you know. And so, you know, but no, he was cool. Anyway, that was Rainbow Quartz.
And then you stayed with this label, right? You did quite a few recordings for.
Yeah, we did a few recordings with them, and they were supportive. But we just had a lot of ups and downs with the infrastructure of tour. You know, we had a booking agent at that time, but we didn't have management. We didn't have a lot of the things in place to really capitalize on the momentum.
Yeah, like a small label like that, what kind of support would they give you? You know, would they probably not a whole lot of monetary support, I'm assuming?
Well, in this case, he was cool about me going in the studio and wasting a lot of money, so that was good. And he was, he gave us some tour support. So, we had that, but the label wasn't a real, they weren't as high profile as a label as, some of these other labels like Matador and Sub Pop and things like that. They were kind of, more under the radar than some of these others. So even though they did spend money on publicity and did all these things, it was sort of, but there were other obstacles. I mean, it wasn't, the label, they the labels all did well by us. It was sort of, it's just hard to keep it all together. I think not having a manager was always a difficult thing, but also, the Outrageous Cherry was sort of, I wouldn't say volatile band. It was a band with an unusual psychological landscape. And I think that we had a tendency to scare off like major label people, they didn't look at us and see dollar signs. I think they looked at us and saw Syd Barrett, and they saw, I think it's like I read this story about Big Star where they made their third album and their producer Jim Dickinson gave a copy to the guy at Atlantic, Jerry Wexler, and he came back to him and said, "Hey baby, that chest pressing you gave me makes me very uncomfortable," or something like that. And it's like he could have been talking about Outrageous Cherry because we just thought we were making pop records. But, the band broke up in 2017 when Larry passed away. And since then, I've had time to reflect on it. And I go back and I listen to some of the stuff, and I think, at the time, I was just, I'm just trying to write a song like the Turtles or the Beach Boys. But, bands like the Turtles and the Beach Boys had a tendency to sort of put all the psychological stuff in the background. They kind of, we were going to sing about California girls and Surfing USA. And there's a whole psychological element of just, of trauma and discord, but it's hidden because they're trying to sort of reach people in this other level. And we really, I think, thought we were doing that. But when I listen back to it, it's sort of like Big Star, where Big Star wasn't able to conceal the psychological context of the group. And I think that that's something that, with us, it's, I think the lyrics sometimes are kind of funny, but they're the band wasn't hiding, our ups and downs, I guess, and that kind of is, frightening to people who just want entertainment,
Yeah, but the song sounded so good. Even if the lyrical content was a little strange.
Yeah.
It's plus, I got to see you guys open for Matthew Sweet in the mid-'90s at the Majestic.
It wasn't Matthew Sweet. It was something else. No, it wasn't Matthew Sweet. We didn't.
I thought it was the.
No, it was. We played a bunch of gigs there.
It was so cool.
Was it Wilco?
Could have been Wilco.
Probably.
99.
I think that was Wilco. It was either Wilco or Yo La Tango.
I didn't see them.
No, it was a Wilco show, I think.
It was Wilco. Okay.
Yeah.
So my brain screwed that one around. But what a show! Like seeing you guys, the dynamic of the jams.
Yeah.
And then the depth of the lyrics, psychedelic, and ladies and gentlemen all having a good time.
Yeah,
That was huge. That was right up in front, and that's the first time I got to see you live. And I'm like, there's the dude right there. That's right. So, I'm assuming you just look like you stuck out of the band, and then my buddies think Scott Hagen introduced me to you or some more of your music, Outrageous Cherry or something.
Oh, yeah.
Hagen.
Yeah, I know Scotty. Yeah.
I grew up with him.
Right
It's
on.
like one thing led to another.
Yeah.
So that was Wilco. Okay. Talk about cloud in the old brain, man.
Well, it's. I get a lot of these shows mixed up, but we had various people, in other bands. Really, looking back on it, we had people trying to spread the word about our band. Like people in bands like, like Jeff Tweedy from Wilco. And Yo La Tango, Stereo Lab, Guided by Voices. They would all ask us to open for them. So we'd get these bands that we really admired. Putting us as an opener because they were really trying to spread the word about us. And the person who probably, really, worked the hardest to spread the word about us was Little Steven, Steven Van Zandt.
In the Underground Garage?
Yeah. He was at some of our shows, I believe. I remember him being at one show before I met him where we played with Richard and the Young Lions in New Jersey. There was a reunion show of this great New Jersey band.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, they were terrific. And but we got
Open Up Your Door.
Yeah,
Classic.
It's a great record. Yeah, and so we got to open for Richard and the Young Lions, who were great. And it was at Maxwell's in New Jersey, and Stephen was there. And I met him later, but he was at he saw us before the Underground Garage thing, before he did his radio show. But he, he was always, really supportive, and really.
Yeah, I could see your band would really appeal to him.
Yeah.
Were you featured as like the greatest rock and roll band in the world for one song?
Yeah, or like the
something
coolest
like
song in the
that?
world thing. Yeah, actually, I think we
world.
might have had a couple. I think he. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know what he did? He put out on his label. He put out a compilation of our stuff that he put together himself without any input from us.
This is the greatest hits?
Yeah. He
Little
did that.
Stephen did that.
Yeah, he picked all the songs and then he did the artwork himself. I mean, he literally just did the whole thing. It was his own project. And he re-edited 2 of the songs. And one of the songs, he's just like, nah, that song, I don't like where the chorus and bridge is or something. So he re-edited it and he sent it to me. And I was kind of amazed because the edit was really good. It was a song. It was What Have You Invented Today was the song. And he did this edit of it that just, he moved the stuff around.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, wow.
Well, what a great guy to have in your corner, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he is one of the great rock and roll enthusiasts of the entire world.
Yeah.
I mean, Little Stephen.
Yeah.
He's something else.
Yeah. And he's just, he's a great musician. It's like he's one of those guys where, I mean, he just, when you're talking to him, I mean, he's just, he's a musician 100%. I mean, he has these other things he does and all that, but, ultimately the guy's.
Yeah, well, what a pedigree, being in the E Street Band, and, all his solo stuff is great, too.
Yeah.
How did Alice Cooper land on you guys that you ended up on Detroit Stories, or at least Our Love Will Change the World, right?
Well, what it was is I got a message on my answering machine from Bob Ezrin, saying, basically, me and Alice Cooper are sitting here listening to this song, but we can't figure out the lyrics. Will you please call us? I'm just like, is somebody messing with me? Is this for real? And I called and it was really him, but which was really bizarre because Bob Ezrin is like a really huge influence on me. Like all the records he did with Alice and with
Lou Reed,
with Berlin, Lou Reed. Yeah. I mean, it's like
Ursa Major,
right?
Yeah,
Dick Wagner.
He did all the stuff with Dick Wagner, who I had gotten to know Dick Wagner a little bit before Dick Wagner passed away. He was, one of my guitar heroes. Just a great musician and a great guy. So anyway, but I get this call and I call him back and basically he and Alice are on the call, and I was trying to be cool, and I'm like. And they're, and then I'm just like, oh man, I bought Alice Cooper Goes to Hell and Lace and Whiskey when it came out, and Cooper's like, oh, he's the one who bought that one, And so it was fun. So that was what happened. So then they decided to cover that song, and then they didn't cover it, and they said, oh well, we went in the studio, but we didn't end up doing it. But man, we're just big fans of your band, and whatever. And then like a year later, I get another email from Bob Ezrin, like, are you sure you're okay with us changing a few lyrics here and there? Because he felt that my lyrics were a little too, the way he put it, he just said, well, they're a little hippie-ish for the Alice Cooper character to sing. He goes, I don't mean that as a criticism. There are just things in it he wouldn't say, and we need to alter it. Are you okay with that? I said, hey, man, do whatever you want,
Yeah.
So that's what happened. So then a year later, they went in the studio and they just recorded it. They were in the studio in Detroit and they recorded it. And then after that, they invited me to the studio, and then they had me play on a different song than the one.
Right, I saw that.
So so I was in there, playing with.
What studio was that?
It was a studio called Rust Belt.
Rust
It was
Belt.
in the suburbs.
Oh, yeah.
And, but they had like, Wayne Kramer and Johnny Badanjek were in there. Mark Farner played on the record, but he wasn't there when we recorded, which is too bad because I'd really like to meet Mark Farner. He's like, that's somebody where, those Grand Funk records, as time goes by,
Yeah.
I find myself listening to a lot of Grand Funk.
Well, that had to be a big thrill when that album came out and you're on there. Or your song is on there, and you were on there as well.
Yeah. It was really, it was, I mean, it was surreal, to have that happen.
Well, right, because there were only really 4 Michigan artists, right? They had rock and roll, the Mitch Ryder version of the Lou Reed song. They had a Seeger, Curly Seeger, an MC5, and Outrageous Cherry.
That was like our first podcast we did without talking about Gary or Fred Reif, who's not here today, or myself, where we didn't introduce it. We did our first regular show was about the Detroit Cooper record. They sent us a promo, told us to talk about it. We tried to get Alice.
Oh, really?
So we mentioned you because I was like immediately like, oh man, they got the local guys on it too, which is this is the way to go. And then I just recently talked to B over the last few weeks. He was supposed to be doing it today with us.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, man, that record, last one he went to #1. He says, and I was on it, He says, that's what we got here in Detroit, I'm like, I love that, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool. Although I have to admit that I was hoping he would do the whole thing about Detroit groups, like do a song by The Frost and The Stooges and SRC, or he could have went, some of the later Detroit bands like the Dirt Bombs or the Go, that would have been kind of in the area or the era where you were recording. I would have loved to have seen him do the album like that, and give the props to all these other Detroit bands that, didn't really, aren't really like on everybody's mind nationally, that having Alice do it, that's quite a platform, right?
Well,
there.
there's definitely a thing in Detroit where, the Stooges and MC5, after being neglected in the 70s, they, they're not neglected anymore.
Oh, no.
But bands that were like the SRC and the Third Power and,
Right.
and the Frost, all these other groups. I mean, I think that it's almost as if the MC5 Stooges attention has been so huge that it kind of eclipsed a lot of this other stuff rather than, what I mean?
With it, right.
I mean, like a band like SRC. Actually, Outrageous Cherry opened for SRC at a reunion gig at the Magic Bag, and which was really cool. And that band was, they're interesting because they were a big influence on Genesis.
Yeah.
It's like Genesis.
We've had Steve Lyman on show, and I mentioned that to him. He said, I read that somewhere.
Yeah, it's almost too bad that SRC didn't travel to England.
That's
because
really
they had, a lot of support from John Peel.
Right. And Pete Townsend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That like sometimes by going over to England that you break in America just because you make a splash in England.
Right. Well, it's like Hendrix had to go to London.
Yeah, right. Perfect example.
Yeah.
Well, there's one band that from that era that I think really should have gone to Europe. Have you ever heard of Sproton Layer?
No.
Sproton Layer were from Ann Arbor, late 60s. Bass, drums, guitar, and had a horn player. But they were doing stuff that was so out there and so weird. I mean, they were influenced by like the Alice Cooper Pretties for You album and Captain Beefheart. So these guys, they were in high school. They were total weirdos doing this weird stuff. And they were doing it in Ann Arbor at a time when it was just probably 69 when psychedelia became unfashionable in Ann Arbor, and everybody wanted to hear Commander Cody and his Lost Planet Airmen or something, or the band. They did not want to hear what these guys were doing with the Sproton Layer. And but they recorded an album that only came out on reel-to-reel tape at the time, and it just and that's what I was told. But it got reissued like a under the radar reissue in the 90s, but then they did a proper reissue 10 years ago in Germany on the World and Sound label, and it's just this absolutely fantastic, like strange kind of psych prog thing. And they when the record came out, they played some gigs, and they played in Detroit and Ann Arbor. I went to both shows, and I just told them afterwards, I'm like, man, you guys needed to leave Ann Arbor and go to France because you guys were ahead of like what Gong and Magma and bands like that were doing. I was like, if you guys had gone to Europe, you would have been ahead of the curve, whereas in Detroit and Ann Arbor, no one could understand what they were doing,
Right.
But those guys, what's interesting is the main guy went on to start a band years later called Mission to Burma in Boston.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Roger Miller.
Yeah, sure.
And his brother and the other guys in the band were his brothers, Benjamin Miller and Lawrence Miller. And they went on to play with Destroy All Monsters and Xanadu. And Ben Miller, he's been playing with me a little bit because I've got a new group called Matthew Smith Group. And my saxophone player, Molly Jones, sometimes she can't make the gigs because she's everyone in my band has their own bands and does their own thing. So there were some gigs where Molly was busy doing something else, and we had a gig come up, and so Ben Miller has played sax with us. So he's a guy who he's an interesting guy, like Sproton Layer, Straw Monster.
Yeah.
You mentioned to me when we first started talking about coming on the podcast a couple of years ago about a band up our way that we tracked down, and you recently talked about a Flint band you wanted us to track down for you too.
Oh yeah, Mad Dog.
Mad Dog.
That was him that told us.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, dude, down here in Detroit, that's like the album of the month right now.
Okay, yeah. Bob plays weekly in Bay City.
Oh really?
Yeah.
That's a great record.
Yeah, he's got a band called Bluesmobile.
Okay.
And for a while, he and his brother Joe were playing all the time at Scotty Sandbar.
Joe's he's on the board in
Yeah,
Bay City.
Joe's now gone political.
Yeah.
He's the commissioner.
But that Mad Dog was, they got a lost record that's sitting in the archives on tape. I've been trying to get him to come over with it, so I could take it to Third Man, but we'll see.
Well, I listened to the podcast you did with them, and it was great. It was really, really interesting hearing those guys talk about just, doing that music at that time and place in that, and living
77 or 76 and
the whole, basically across the 70s.
Yeah, they had a great setup, that industrial building where,
Yeah. Wow.
Well, they would need it to play that music. They need,
right.
But it's like that was the 70s. That was the period where, after the era of the MC5 and Stooges, they wouldn't let you play original music. I mean, you had this incredibly creative scene, and then by the early 70s, it completely was obliterated and became all just cover bands. And so that's why, like, anytime you discover a record from Detroit or Michigan from the 70s of original music that's good, there are these bands that couldn't get gigs half the time because they were playing originals, and they wouldn't let people play originals again in bars until the punk rock scene happened in Detroit. And I wouldn't even call it the punk rock scene because the bands all sounded like they were trying to sound like the Flamin' Groovies for the most part, but it wasn't really punk rock, a lot of it, to my mind. But Bookies in Detroit, it was like when Bookies started up, these guys were like, you can play, we don't care what you play. So they were like able to play originals, and that's when I think people in Detroit started writing songs again and being able to play them live. But when I was a kid, I remember seeing shows just when I was really little, and the bands would come out and play covers, and that was the thing.
Yeah, you couldn't get hired in a bar unless you were a cover band.
Yeah.
And there was, it was pretty good money. You're playing in bars there, you probably play 4, sometimes 5 nights a week. Mm-hmm. We're making a lot more money than people working in GM factories could.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is there a scene down here for you for this record thing that you're talking to me about once in a while? Like you say, that's a hot record collector thing. Where do you come? Is it here? Or
there's just the music scene here is really like, there's a real community of record collectors here who are into really obscure stuff and really cool stuff. And it was the guys at People's Records right here next door that, they had the Mad Dog record on the wall. I'm like, what's that? And they're like, well, you probably want to check this out. And I'm just like, and I listened to it. I'm like, yeah, I need this, but man, this is expensive. And then I went home and I couldn't sleep that night. So I came back the next day and picked it up. And it was like, I can't remember, but it was not under 100. I'll tell you that. It was at least $100.
My grandkids had one for sale for $50.
Oh, really?
I know those guys. He said, you can have it.
So he gave it to you. Yeah. Right on. Well, I'll tell you, I've had that experience in Detroit because the record collectors, are real cool people. So I've had some people give me some really rare records where they just, here, the same thing you're describing, where, yeah, man, you'll appreciate this. Here, have this, So those guys, if they ever ask me to do some kind of favor, I have to say, just.
We bring an end to episode 1, part 1 with Mr. Matthew Smith here in Detroit. We had a wonderful time getting to know him, getting to know all of his musical history and his collections, and he's touched a part of everything on the Michigan music scene. So tune back in 2 weeks when we have part 2 with Mr. Matthew Smith, and we're going to pump up the volume with his current creations as well as more of his great stories of his rock and roll history of being an independent and prolific leader in the Detroit music scene. Thank you all for tuning in. See ya.
On behalf of our hosts, we would like to thank the Michigan Rock Legends Hall of Fame, our guests, and especially our listeners. The MMHP is found on the 989 network, as well as all familiar podcast hubs. Up-to-the-minute information, as well as Dr. J and Sir Fred's Michigan Music Songs of the Week, can be found on the MMHP's Facebook page, /MMHP989. You can connect with Scott at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com, and Mr. Mike on YouTube as MRBTEE1.
And on behalf of Dr. J, Sir Fred, Mr. Mike, and myself, Scott Baker, we would like to thank Eddie Switek for